The 24-hour lie. How Todd Blanche's promise collapsed overnight. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche sat across from ABC News Chief Justice Correspondent Pierre Thomas on Friday afternoon, December 19, 2025. The camera was rolling. The deadline had just passed. And Blanche knew he needed to control the narrative. Is there any effort to redact President Trump's name from the Epstein files? Thomas asked directly. Blanche didn't hesitate. There's no effort to hold anything back because there's the name Donald J. Trump or anybody else's name. There's no effort to hold back or not hold back because of that. We're not redacting the names of famous men and women that are associated with Epstein. It was clear, unequivocal, on the record. The Trump administration was not hiding anything about the president's connection to Jeffrey Epstein. 24 hours later, that promise was exposed as a lie. And the proof was simple. 16 files that had been publicly available on Friday were suddenly gone on Saturday, including one that showed President Trump's photograph sitting in Jeffrey Epstein's desk drawer. The deletion wasn't a technical glitch. It wasn't an accident. It was a deliberate act of cover-up. And it happened so quickly that journalists, researchers, and everyday Americans who'd downloaded the files on Friday could prove exactly what had been removed. This is the story of how the Trump administration's most senior law enforcement official lied on camera about transparency, and how the evidence of that lie disappeared within hours. But not before the internet saved it. The deadline day promise. December 19, 2025, was supposed to be a day of reckoning. The Epstein Files Transparency Act, signed into law by President Trump himself just 30 days earlier, required the Department of Justice to release all documents related to Jeffrey Epstein's criminal investigations by end of day. But as the clock approached midnight, it was clear the DOJ had no intention of full compliance. Instead of releasing everything, they released what Deputy AG Blanche called several 100,000 documents, a fraction of what legal experts estimated should have been disclosed. The release came in waves throughout the day. Thousands of photographs, court documents, FBI memos. Many were heavily redacted. Some were completely blacked out. But they were being posted to a newly created DOJ website called the Epstein Library. By Friday evening, journalists and researchers were combing through the files. Most were previously public, already released through court cases or Freedom of Information Act requests. The new material was sparse. Lots of photos of Epstein's properties, some celebrity photos that provided no context, and endless pages of redactions. But buried in the thousands of files was something significant. File 468. The image showed a credenza in what appeared to be Epstein's New York mansion. On top of the credenza sat framed photographs. Epstein with various famous people. But the camera had also captured an open drawer below the tabletop. And inside that drawer were two printed photographs. One showed Donald Trump standing surrounded by women in bathing suits. The other, partially obscured behind the first, appeared to be a well-known photo of Trump and Melania, with Epstein and Ghislaine Maxwell at a social event. The photos weren't new. Both had circulated before, but their presence in Epstein's drawer, preserved as physical prints, suggested something more personal than a casual acquaintance. These weren't photos Epstein happened to have. These were photos Epstein kept in his private desk, accessible and apparently valued enough to store rather than discard. When File 468 was first spotted Friday evening, several journalists downloaded it immediately. The file was 2.3 megabytes. High resolution, clear detail. It was archived, screenshotted, and shared across social media within hours. And that's when the Trump administration realized they'd made a mistake. The interview that aged like milk. While File 468 was spreading across the internet Friday night, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche was doing damage control on television. His interview with ABC News aired in segments throughout Friday evening and Saturday morning. Blanche was Trump's former personal defense attorney. He'd represented the president in multiple criminal cases before being appointed to the second highest position at the Justice Department. His loyalty to Trump was unquestioned. His credibility, however, was about to be destroyed. When Pierre Thomas asked about redacting Trump's name, Blanche delivered his rehearsed answer with confidence. Assuming it's consistent with the law, yes, every document that mentions Trump will be released. There's no effort to hold anything back because there's the name Donald J. Trump. Thomas pressed further. So you're saying that nothing is being withheld because it mentions the president? Correct, Blanche responded. We're following the law. We're protecting victims' identities as required, but we're not redacting famous names, not Trump's, not anyone's. It was the answer the administration needed America to hear. Full transparency, no special treatment, nothing to hide. But even as Blanche was giving that interview, someone at the Justice Department was reviewing File 468 and making a decision. The overnight deletion. Saturday morning, December 20th, researchers and journalists who'd spent Friday night cataloging the Epstein files began noticing something strange. Files they'd bookmarked were no longer accessible. Links that had worked 12 hours earlier now returned error messages. NBC News was the first to document it systematically. Their reporters cross-referenced Friday's file list with Saturday's available downloads. The conclusion was startling. At least 16 files had been removed from the DOJ's Epstein Library website. File 468, the image showing Trump's photos in Epstein's desk drawer, was gone. So were 15 other files. Most showed artwork in Epstein's homes, including paintings of nude women. Several showed rooms with massage tables. One showed mail slots filled with envelopes. Another showed a notebook with names and apartment numbers. The DOJ offered no explanation, no press release, no update to the website noting that files had been removed. They simply deleted them and hoped no one would notice. They were wrong, because journalists had downloaded the files Friday. They had the originals. They could prove exactly what had been removed, and they could prove that the Trump administration had lied about transparency. The cover-up exposed. By Saturday afternoon, the story was everywhere, not just on left-leaning outlets, but across the political spectrum. Because this wasn't about politics. This was about a documented lie. The House Oversight Committee's Democrats were first to call it out publicly. In a post on X, formerly Twitter, they wrote, "This photo, File 468, from the Epstein files that includes Donald Trump, has apparently now been removed from the DOJ release. At Pam Bondi, is this true? What else is being covered up? We need transparency for the American public." The post included a screenshot of File 468, the image the DOJ had deleted. Thousands of people who'd never heard of the Epstein files suddenly saw a photo of Trump's image sitting in Jeffrey Epstein's personal desk drawer. And they saw that the Trump administration had tried to hide it. Senator Dick Durbin, ranking Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee, issued a blistering statement. After mishandling the Epstein files all year, the Trump administration is now violating federal law to protect the rich and powerful. They had a choice, survivors or Donald Trump. They chose the latter. Senate Judiciary Democrats will investigate this violation of law and make sure the American people know about it. Even some Republicans looked uncomfortable. Representative Thomas Massie, a Kentucky Republican who'd co-sponsored the Epstein Files Transparency Act, slammed the administration on social media. He called the release a failure to comply with both the spirit and the letter of the law, and warned that a future DOJ could convict the current AG and others for violating the statute. But the most damaging response came from a simple side-by-side comparison that went viral on social media. Friday, 6:00 p.m. Todd Blanche on ABC News. There's no effort to hold back anything because of Trump's name. Saturday, 12 p.m. File 468. Showing Trump's photo in Epstein's drawer, deleted from DOJ website. The juxtaposition was devastating. Blanche had promised transparency on camera. Within hours, his department had deleted evidence showing Trump in Epstein's personal collection. The lie was provable. The cover-up was documented. And the internet had receipts. The excuse that made it worse. By Sunday morning, the DOJ knew they had to respond, but their explanation only made things worse. In a statement posted to the Epstein Library website, the department said, "Photos and other materials will continue being reviewed and redacted consistent with the law in an abundance of caution as we receive additional information." Read that again. Continue being reviewed and redacted. Meaning they'd already released the files, then decided retroactively to remove them. That's not how transparency works. That's how cover-ups work. The statement went on. If information includes non-public personally identifiable information or other sensitive content, to include matters of a sexual nature, the public should contact DOJ, and we will take steps to correct the problem as soon as possible. In other words, if we accidentally released something embarrassing, tell us so we can delete it. But File 468 didn't contain non-public personally identifiable information. The people in the photos, Trump, Melania, Epstein, Maxwell, were all publicly known figures. The photos themselves had been published before. There was no privacy violation, no sensitive victim information, no legal justification for removal. The only reason to delete File 468 was that it was politically inconvenient. It showed Trump's connection to Epstein in a way that was harder to dismiss. Not just they knew each other, or they were at the same party, but Epstein kept Trump's photo in his personal desk drawer. That's not a casual acquaintance. That's a relationship Epstein valued enough to preserve physically. And the Trump administration couldn't let that image stay public. The double standard. What made the cover-up even more egregious was what the DOJ didn't delete. The Friday release included multiple photos of former President Bill Clinton. Clinton on a plane with a woman whose face was redacted. Clinton in what appeared to be a hot tub. Clinton with celebrities like Michael Jackson, Diana Ross, and Mick Jagger at Epstein-connected events. All of those photos remained available. None were deleted. The DOJ had no problem leaving images of a Democratic former president in the Epstein files. But images of the current Republican president? Gone within 24 hours. White House spokesperson Abigail Jackson tried to spin this as evidence of fairness. In a statement Saturday, she said, "By releasing thousands of pages of documents and President Trump recently calling for further investigations into Epstein's Democrat friends, the Trump administration has done more for the victims than Democrats ever have. It was a masterclass in deflection. Ignore the deleted Trump photos. Focus on the Clinton photos that weren't deleted. Claim credit for transparency while actively engaging in cover-up." But Americans weren't buying it because they'd seen Todd Blanche's interview, they'd heard his promise, and they'd watched his department break that promise within hours. The legal implications. The Epstein Files Transparency Act isn't a suggestion, it's federal law. And it's very specific about what must be released. All unclassified records, documents, communications, and investigative materials in the possession of the Department of Justice, FBI, and U.S. Attorney's offices. There's no exemption for materials that make the president look bad. There's no clause allowing retroactive deletion of already released files. The law is clear. Release everything, protect victim identities, nothing else. By removing File 468 and 15 other files after initial release, the DOJ may have violated that law, and legal experts were quick to point this out. Once you release a document publicly, You can't just unrelease it because you don't like the reaction, said Bradley Moss, a national security attorney. If the file was lawfully released on Friday, removing it on Saturday is obstruction. If it wasn't supposed to be released on Friday, then they violated their own review process. Either way, it's a scandal. Rebecca Sharpless, director of the Immigration Clinic at the University of Miami School of Law, noted the dangerous precedent. What message does this send? That the government can release information, gauge public reaction, then delete anything politically damaging? That's not transparency. That's propaganda. Senator Durbin promised Senate Judiciary Committee investigations, but more significantly, he hinted at potential criminal referrals. If DOJ officials knowingly violated federal law by withholding required documents, that's a crime, Durbin said in a Sunday interview. We will follow the evidence wherever it leads. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The same administration that had spent years complaining about government cover-ups was now engaged in one. The same FBI director who'd promised to release Epstein files because of who's on that list was now part of hiding them. The Blanche credibility collapse. For Todd Blanche personally, the damage was irreparable. He'd been Trump's trusted attorney. He'd been rewarded with one of the most powerful positions in American law enforcement, and in his first major test of credibility, he'd been exposed as a liar within 24 hours. His ABC News interview was now being replayed endlessly on cable news, social media, and in congressional hearings. Every time he'd said, "No effort to hide Trump's name," the deleted file 468 appeared next to his face. Democratic lawmakers demanded his resignation. Todd Blanche lied to the American people on national television, said Representative Dan Goldman. He promised transparency, then orchestrated a cover-up. He's unfit to serve as Deputy Attorney General. Even Trump allies were quietly distancing themselves. When asked about the deleted files, White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said she'd have to check with DOJ before commenting. Translation: we're letting Blanche take the fall. And Blanche himself? Silent. No follow-up interviews, no press statements, no attempt to explain the contradiction between his Friday promise and Saturday's deletions, because there was no good explanation. He'd been caught. On camera, lying about a cover-up that was exposed within hours. Where it stands. As of Sunday, December 21st, 2025, File 468 remains deleted from the official DOJ website. But it's everywhere else. News outlets have published it. Social media has archived it. Researchers have downloaded it. The attempt to memory hole the image has failed spectacularly. The DOJ claims more files will be released in the coming weeks. But after the Friday to Saturday deletions, no one believes them. If they'll remove files within 24 hours of release, why would anyone trust future releases? Congressional investigations are ramping up. The House Oversight Committee has requested all communications between DOJ officials about which files to delete. The Senate Judiciary Committee has scheduled hearings, and watchdog groups have filed Freedom of Information Act requests for the decision-making process behind the removals. Meanwhile, the original question remains unanswered. Why did Jeffrey Epstein keep Donald Trump's photos in his personal desk drawer? What was the nature of their relationship? And why is the Trump administration so desperate to hide evidence of that connection? Todd Blanche promised transparency. He delivered cover-up. And he got caught in less time than it takes to watch a movie. One interview, one promise, one deleted file. 24 hours. That's all it took to prove the Trump administration was lying about the Epstein files.